Princess Yelvana stepped off the sleek Silverian royal shuttle and immediately wrinkled her delicate, shimmering nose. The humid earth air seemed to cling to her like an unwelcome embrace, and the slight pull of the planet's gravity felt downright aggressive. Around her, bustling humans in crisp uniforms tried their best to look professional while sneaking glances at the tall, radiant alien. Yelvana's gown, a cascade of iridescent fabrics that seemed to shimmer like liquid starlight, floated behind her as if unwilling to touch the filthy ground. "This is where I'm staying?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief as she gestured at the towering Earth embassy. "It's not Zilvaris, but it'll do," Marcus replied, stepping forward. The human diplomat, ruggedly built with an air of someone who'd rather be anywhere else, extended a hand. Marcus grinned. "I'm here to make sure you don't get yourself into too much trouble." Yelvana looked at his hand as if it were some foreign, primitive tool. "I'm not touching that." "Suit yourself," Marcus muttered, withdrawing it with a shrug. "You've got a long stay ahead, princess. Might as well get comfortable." Her luminous eyes scanned him, equal parts intrigued and unimpressed. "You'll be my assistant?" "Think of me more as your babysitter," Marcus quipped, his smirk growing when he saw the slight twitch in her otherwise perfect expression. "Babysitter," she repeated, her tone icy enough to make a diplomat sweat. "I doubt your qualifications are adequate." Marcus let out a low chuckle. "We'll see about that." The moment they stepped into the embassy's main lobby, Yelvana's luggage was whisked away by a team of staff, only for her to hear the dreaded words, "Your belongings will need to be scanned and quarantined." "What?" she exclaimed, her melodious voice rising in indignation. "My belongings are invaluable. They cannot be subjected to scanning." Marcus stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. "Relax. It's just standard protocol. You'll have your stuff back in no time." "Relax?" Yelvana hissed, turning on him. "I cannot function without my wardrobe assistant. How am I expected to dress without it?" "Like the rest of us," Marcus replied dryly. "With your hands." Yelvana's gaze sharpened. "You truly believe I'll stoop to such barbarism? You will acquire appropriate attire for me immediately." "Sure thing, Your Highness," Marcus replied, a grin tugging at his lips. "Let's hit the nearest store." The trip to the department store was less of a shopping spree and more of a comedic disaster. Yelvana glided through the aisles with an air of disdain, her glittering gown drawing stares from all directions. She picked up a simple earth dress and held it up as if inspecting a relic. "This thing?" she asked. "It has no shimmer, no life. It looks like something one would use to clean floors." Marcus, trailing behind her with growing exasperation, finally spoke up. "It's practical. You're gonna have to get used to that word while you're here." "Practical is just another word for ugly," Yelvana shot back. By the time she finally settled on a dress, an elegant yet understated option Marcus had practically forced her to try on, it was clear she had no idea how to wear it. "Do I put my legs in first or my head?" she asked, holding it up with an expression of utter confusion. "Seriously?" Marcus asked, running a hand down his face. "How have you gotten through life without knowing how to put on clothes?" Yelvana's reply was instant and unapologetic. "I've always had assistants." "Well, unless your assistant bot pops out of quarantine early, you're stuck with me." Her jaw tightened, but she thrust the dress toward him. "Fine. Assist me." The following moments were nothing short of comedic gold. Yelvana struggled with every step of the process, from pulling the dress over her head to adjusting its fit. Marcus, trying his best to maintain professionalism, couldn't help but laugh when she managed to get her arms tangled in the fabric. "Stop laughing," she snapped, glaring at him. "This is a flawed design." "It's not the dress," Marcus replied, barely containing his grin. "It's the user." When they finally managed to get the dress on properly, Yelvana turned to face him. "How do I look?" Marcus hesitated, his smirk softening. "Not bad, princess. Not bad at all." Her cheeks, ever so slightly, flushed a faint silver hue, but she quickly turned away. I suppose it'll do, for now. As they left the store, Marcus glanced over at her, his grin returning. Welcome to Earth, princess. You're gonna fit right in. And by fit, I assume you mean be forced to tolerate mediocrity, she retorted, though there was a flicker of amusement in her tone. Call it what you want, Marcus replied, shoving his hands in his pockets. But you're about to learn what humans do best, improvise. Yelvana shot him a sideways glance, her expression softening just enough to suggest that perhaps Earth wasn't entirely hopeless. At least, not yet. Back at the embassy, Yelvana was introduced to her new living quarters, a spacious suite by human standards but downright primitive compared to Zilverian luxury. The moment she stepped inside, she froze. This cannot be correct, she said, staring at the minimalist decor. This looks like a containment cell. Marcus leaned casually against the doorframe, arms crossed. That's the premium suite. You're lucky I convinced them not to stick you in the barracks. Her sharp gaze flicked toward him. You call this premium? Where are the atmospheric regulators? The aroma diffusers? The hollow comfort walls? Marcus pushed off the doorframe and strolled in. We've got a thermostat, an air freshener, and a flat-screen TV. Welcome to Earth. Yelvana sighed dramatically and sank into the couch. The cushions didn't even adjust to her form. How did humans live like this? Fine, she said at last. Since I'm expected to endure this, I'll need sustenance. Surely you can manage that? Now you're speaking my language, Marcus said with a grin. Hope you're hungry. Minutes later, Yelvana found herself staring at a plate of something Marcus called pizza. It was hot, greasy, and utterly foreign. She poked at it with a fork. What is this monstrosity? It's pizza, Marcus said, taking a massive bite of his own slice. Trust me, it's the best thing on earth. Yelvana's nose wrinkled, but she reluctantly picked up a slice. Her delicate fingers barely managed to hold it before some of the cheese started sliding off. She yelped, dropping it back onto the plate. Am I supposed to consume this with my hands? Yup, Marcus replied, watching her with an amused gleam in his eye. She sighed, clearly annoyed, but finally lifted the slice again. The first tentative bite was followed by a pause, then another, more enthusiastic bite. Well? Marcus asked. It's tolerable, she admitted, though her expression betrayed her enjoyment. That's the spirit. As the meal continued, Yelvana began to relax, though her alien tendencies were impossible to hide. She instinctively tried to summon a cleaning bot to deal with the crumbs, only to remember none were available. When Marcus handed her a napkin, she examined it as if it were some strange artifact. What is this for? To wipe your hands. She stared at him. You mean to tell me humans use cloth for cleaning themselves? How inefficient. Marcus chuckled, leaning back in his chair. You're gonna find a lot of things inefficient here, princess. Once the meal was finished, Yelvana demanded a proper wardrobe. She still refused to accept the plain earth dress as her long-term attire. Fine, Marcus said. But don't expect anything fancy. We're working with a human budget here. Budget? Yelvana repeated, as if the word were an insult. Yeah, it's a thing where we don't spend a fortune on clothes we'll only wear once. She scoffed but followed him to a small fashion boutique. Inside, Marcus watched as Yelvana rifled through racks with increasing frustration. Every outfit she tried seemed to highlight her inability to grasp earth fashion. This one is too tight, she complained, holding up a slim-fitting jumpsuit. That's the point, Marcus said. And this one, she continued, holding a flowing sundress, has no structural integrity. It's practically falling apart. It's supposed to be breezy, Marcus explained, trying not to laugh. By the time she settled on a chic blazer and pants combo, Marcus could barely keep a straight face. When she emerged from the dressing room, though, he had to admit she looked stunning. Well, she asked, spinning slowly. Marcus cleared his throat. Not bad. You might even pass for human. She smirked. A high compliment coming from you. The moment was interrupted by a commotion outside the boutique. A small crowd had gathered, their attention focused on a robotic assistant malfunctioning in the street. Yelvana's curiosity got the better of her, and she stepped outside to investigate. The robot, a delivery drone, was spinning in circles, spilling its cargo of packages. Humans stood by, unsure how to intervene. Typical, Yelvana muttered. Primitive technology. Think you can do better? Marcus asked, crossing his arms. Without waiting for an answer, Yelvana strode forward. She crouched next to the robot, her slender fingers moving deftly as she examined its inner workings. Marcus watched, impressed despite himself. You actually know what you're doing? Of course, she replied. Zilverians don't rely solely on machines. We understand them, unlike your kind. A few adjustments later, the robot whirred to life and resumed its delivery route. The crowd applauded, and Yelvana stood, brushing imaginary dust from her hands. Impressed? She asked, a hint of smugness in her tone. Marcus nodded. I'll admit, that was pretty cool. She gave him a triumphant smile, the first genuine one he'd seen. Perhaps humans aren't entirely hopeless after all. Thanks, Princess. I'll take that as a compliment. As they walked back to the embassy, Marcus couldn't help but notice a subtle change in Yelvana's demeanor. She still carried herself with the grace and arrogance of royalty, but there was a hint of curiosity in her eyes, a spark that suggested she might actually be warming to Earth, one awkward step at a time. Yelvana's adjustment to Earth life continued with an increasingly baffling series of discoveries. One such discovery was the human concept of personal hygiene. On Zilvaris, cleanliness was achieved through an automated cleansing pod that left one fresh and fragrant in seconds. But here? She was introduced to what Marcus called a shower. This is absurd, she said, staring at the bathroom contraption. You mean I must stand under this crude water spray and manually clean myself? Marcus leaned against the doorframe, trying to suppress a smirk. That's how we do it, Princess. Unless you'd rather stay dirty. Her glare could have melted steel, but she stepped into the shower stall with the air of a martyr. Moments later, a shriek echoed through the suite. Marcus, she yelled, poking her head out, hair drenched and plastered to her face. This device is malfunctioning. It attacked me with freezing water. Turn the knob to the left, Marcus called back, his voice laced with amusement. She disappeared back into the stall, grumbling audibly. After some trial and error, during which Marcus tried very hard not to laugh at the stream of curses in her native tongue, Yelvana emerged, wrapped in a towel and looking utterly exasperated. Humans, she declared, must enjoy suffering. Hey, you survived, Marcus replied. That's half the battle. The next ordeal was makeup. When Yelvana learned that human women often painted their faces for formal occasions, she was both horrified and intrigued. She insisted on attempting the process herself, confident that her natural Zilverian grace would translate seamlessly. Marcus handed her a small kit he'd borrowed from a colleague. Knock yourself out, he said. An hour later, Yelvana emerged with bright blue eyeliner that extended far past her temples, cheeks smeared with blush, and lips painted in a lopsided crimson. Well, she asked, hands on her hips. Marcus stared for a moment, then burst out laughing. You look like a clown, he managed between chuckles. A what? She demanded, her hands flying to her face. Never mind, Marcus said, still laughing. Here, let me fix it. She hesitated but eventually sat down, allowing him to wipe away her disastrous attempt and apply the makeup himself. As he worked, she studied him intently. You're surprisingly gentle, she observed. Don't sound so shocked, Marcus replied, focused on the task. We humans aren't all brute force and chaos, you know. When he finished, Yelvana turned to the mirror and blinked in surprise. The subtle enhancements highlighted her already striking features, and for the first time, she looked genuinely pleased. It's acceptable, she said, though her tone betrayed her satisfaction. Glad I passed inspection, Marcus said with a mock bow. The next challenge came in the form of human social customs. A formal dinner had been arranged with Earth's top diplomats, and Yelvana was expected to attend. She approached the event with her usual regal demeanor but was quickly blindsided by the nuances of Earth etiquette. The first hurdle was the handshake. When the human ambassador extended his hand, Yelvana stared at it in confusion before awkwardly grabbing it and shaking it far too vigorously. "Firm grip," the ambassador said, wincing slightly. "Thank you," Yelvana replied, oblivious to the discomfort she'd caused. The real disaster struck during the meal. Zilverians consumed their food in a nutrient-dense gel form, so the array of utensils and courses at the dinner table left Yelvana utterly baffled. "Why are there so many tools?" she whispered to Marcus, seated beside her. "Different utensils for different dishes," he explained. "Start from the outside and work your way in." Yelvana eyed the forks and knives warily, then picked up the wrong one, eliciting a stifled chuckle from Marcus. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she muttered. "Maybe a little," he admitted. When the main course arrived, a steak, Yelvana's frustration reached its peak. She jabbed at the meat with her fork, then tried to cut it with the wrong edge of the knife. "Why is this so difficult?" she hissed. "You're holding it backward," Marcus said, trying not to laugh. After several attempts, she managed to cut a small piece and taste it. Her expression shifted from annoyance to delight. "This is exquisite," she admitted, her tone softening. "Earth cuisine isn't so bad after all, huh?" Marcus said with a grin. As the evening progressed, Yelvana began to relax, her initial awkwardness giving way to genuine curiosity about human culture. She listened intently as the diplomats discussed Earth's history and achievements, occasionally chiming in with sharp but thoughtful observations. By the end of the night, even the skeptical ambassadors seemed charmed by her. "She's got potential," one whispered to Marcus. "Don't let her hear you say that," Marcus replied, glancing at Yelvana, who was currently explaining the flaws in Zilverian politics with surprising candor. As they left the event, Marcus turned to her. "Not bad for your first human dinner." "I suppose it wasn't entirely intolerable," she said with a small smile. "High praise coming from you," he teased. She glanced at him, her expression softening for a moment. "You're not as insufferable as I initially thought, Marcus." "Careful, princess," he said with a grin. "You're starting to sound like you might actually like us." "Don't push your luck," she replied, but the hint of a smile lingered as they walked back to the embassy. The next day, Yelvana found herself thrust into an entirely new challenge, navigating Earth's public transportation system. Marcus had suggested the experience as a way to better understand human life, though Yelvana suspected he was enjoying her discomfort far more than he let on. "Are you telling me this metallic tube crammed with humans is your primary mode of travel?" she asked, eyeing the subway car with a mixture of disdain and horror. "Most people don't have personal ships, princess," Marcus replied, ushering her inside. The doors closed with a hiss, and Yelvana immediately clutched a nearby pole, her balance thrown off by the lurching motion of the train. "This is barbaric," she muttered, glaring at the crowd around her. "You're all packed in like, what's the Earth term? Sardines?" "Welcome to the real world," Marcus said, clearly amused. When the train jolted to a sudden stop, Yelvana nearly lost her grip, colliding into Marcus's chest. "Perhaps you could have warned me," she snapped, flustered as she straightened herself. "I thought royalty could handle anything," he teased, earning another glare. As they disembarked, Marcus led her to a bustling market, another crash course in human interaction. The cacophony of sounds, the myriad of smells, and the sheer volume of people left Yelvana visibly overwhelmed. "This is chaos," she said, clutching her translator device tightly. "Chaos with a purpose," Marcus replied. "You wanted to see how humans live? This is it." Despite her initial discomfort, Yelvana's curiosity soon took over. She stopped at a fruit vendor's stall, picking up a bright orange sphere. "What is this?" she asked. "An orange," Marcus replied. "Creative," she said dryly, earning a chuckle from the vendor. The vendor handed her a slice to taste, and her eyes widened at the burst of flavor. This is remarkable, she admitted, though her tone remained aloof. You're welcome, the vendor said with a grin, clearly charmed. As they continued through the market, Yelvana's confidence grew. She asked questions about the various goods, occasionally making sharp observations that left the humans around her both amused and impressed. By the time they left, she was carrying a small bag of earth delicacies she'd insisted on trying. I'll admit, she said, glancing at Marcus, this was not entirely unenjoyable. Careful, he said with a smirk. You're starting to sound like one of us. Her next encounter with human ingenuity came in the form of a crisis. A minor technical issue at the embassy had left her without access to her automated systems. When she asked Marcus to fix it, he handed her a toolbox instead. Fix it yourself, he said, clearly enjoying her look of disbelief. You can't be serious, she said, holding the tools like they were contaminated. It's basic maintenance, he replied. Even humans can do it. With much grumbling, Yelvana set to work. Marcus guided her through the process, though he couldn't resist the occasional sarcastic comment. That's a wrench, not a hammer, he said when she attempted to force a panel open. Perhaps you could have provided clearer instructions, she shot back, though her tone lacked its usual venom. By the time she finished, her hands were smudged with grease, and her usually pristine demeanor was decidedly ruffled. But the system powered on, and she couldn't help a small sense of accomplishment. Not bad for a royal, Marcus said, offering her a cloth to clean her hands. Don't patronize me, she replied, though there was a hint of a smile on her face. The day ended with a quiet moment between the two of them. They sat on a bench overlooking the city, the lights twinkling like stars. You've changed, Marcus said after a while. Excuse me, she replied, arching an eyebrow. When you first got here, you couldn't even imagine life without luxury, he said. Now look at you. Eating street food, fixing machines. You're practically human. She looked out at the city, her expression thoughtful. Perhaps humanity isn't as primitive as I once thought, she admitted softly. You have a resilience, a creativity, that we Zilverians lack. High praise, Marcus said with a grin. Don't let it go to your head, she replied, but there was no malice in her tone. As the night grew darker, they sat in comfortable silence, the alien princess and the human diplomat, two vastly different beings, learning from each other in ways neither had expected.